take me to where you were and how you were feeling going into the selection show and your reaction to seeing the Wolfpack on the 11 line, avoiding Dayton the first four, like many had predicted after NC State lost 3 of their last 4 going into the NCAA tournament. I'll start with you, Matt, our veteran expert here.
Yeah, full disclosure, I was one of those that had NC State and Dayton. So I think I texted both Ethan and Justin. I had NC State as the next to last team in the field. We put up a bracket. Well, I put up a bracket on the wolfpacker.com for our subscribers and really kind of broke it down. And so I was a little bit surprised that they were not in Dayton, to be honest. I thought the lack of really high-end wins might come back to hurt NC State a little bit. But I thought the fact that they were also pretty consistent, no bad losses in quad 3, quad 4. They didn't have a great schedule, but it wasn't an albatross either of a schedule. Would carry the day. It just wouldn't get them much past Dayton. So to tell you where I was in my living room. I wasn't like Ethan, living the good life in Wilmington, apparently, over the weekend. But my daughter, who's about to be 11, is really getting in. She calls it March Madness. That's all. And brackets. Is it bracket time? So we were watching together, and I remember saying, all right, we got to watch the 11 seed. So let's see who pops up here. And sure enough, NC State was the first one. So that's much better, if you're an NC State fan, much better than when was it, 2013 maybe, Justin? You might remember when they were.
It was either 2012 or 2013, but
the very
last team announced.
Yeah, as an 11 seed. And then in 2019, you had the list of bubble teams you're watching for, and it became pretty clear once you said, oh, school X and school Y and school G was in, you knew NC State was probably out. So this made life a lot easier, knowing they got in quick. So I don't know. Do you want me to get into why they got picked over Clemson, or do you want Ethan's?
Let's kick it to Ethan. Ethan, were you going into Selection Sunday? Were you confident that the Wolfpack would have its name called?
I would say in the days leading up to it, my confidence had started high, dropped off a cliff, but by the time the selection show rolled around, it had built back up, and I was pretty confident they were going to make the field. But I was already looking up travel plans to Dayton. I was almost completely sure, okay, they're going to be a first 4 team. That was definitely the feeling I was getting. So I was pleasantly surprised to see them get in and head to Denver.
How much is the flight to Dayton?
It was like $400. It wasn't even that much cheaper than going out to Denver.
Okay.
Not terrible considering the spike in flight activity going to Dayton, I'm sure, this week. But, especially with flight prices these days. But Matt, you're our expert bracketologist. I'd say I agree with both of you guys. I was the guy on the podcast, I think a couple of weeks ago, Matt. We had a podcast right before NC State played Clemson and Duke at home to end the regular season. And I said that NC State was a lock to make the NCAA tournament. And Matt, the experienced, the wise one, said, young grasshopper, stand down. I know you're excited, but it's not a slam dunk maybe like you think it is, and you explained maybe the worst case scenario. Now, the worst case scenario didn't play out because NC State did end up making the NCAA tournament, but it was as close to a worst case scenario ending for NC State's resume as one could have predicted at the time. Of course, at the time, NC State was coming off the win against Wake Forest.
Right? Wake or Carolina, one of those two.
They had won back-to-back home games in pretty impressive fashion, I'd say, in both games. And you thought maybe the second time getting Clemson back at home, you expect NC State was a 7-point favorite in that game and just got hammered. Duke, much more competitive, impressive effort on the road against the eventual ACC champions, but just a little bit too little, too late. Not enough Terquavion Smith in that game for NC State to win. Looked amazing against Virginia Tech looked like a team that maybe had 4 wins in them in Greensboro. And then, of course, they go on to face their kryptonite in Clemson. So, Matt, all of that dragged out recap and leading it to you. You're an expert bracketologist. Why did NC State make the NCAA tournament? And why did Clemson, who beat NC State 3 times in impressive fashion, was left out of the tournament?
Yeah, so there's a great resource on warrennolan.com where you can get all the team sheets. And if you're a nerd, which I will fully admit I am, you can start comparing the 2 team sheets, and you can almost put them side by side on the screen and see. And really, when you look at Clemson's resume, now this is full disclosure, I think Clemson's a really, really good basketball team. I think they are an NCAA tournament team. And I also think they had some of the worst luck of any team in the country, because I don't think they intended to schedule this bad. I think it just blew up on them. You know, they had neutral court games against Iowa, Cal, Richmond, Loyola Chicago. You're playing Penn State at home. You play at South Carolina. You got a good Towson team coming. You know, that's not a schedule set up to be number 333 in the country. But Cal sucked. They might have been worse than Louisville. I
can assure you, as someone that watches Cal basketball, they're only because I have to.
Yeah.
That they are worse than that's a bad team.
Yeah, Loyola Chicago, NCAA tournament team a year ago, Final Four a few years ago, won 10 games this year. Ended up being net 269. South Carolina was net 234. Cal was net 313. Richmond, normally a top 100 net team, they were 159. And so all of that just kind of blew up. But when your strength of schedule in non-conference is 333, Justin, what happened when NC State had a non-conference strength of schedule well under 300 a few years ago?
Well, Kevin Keats will promptly remind you, NC State was left out of the tournament.
Yeah.
And should have been in, according to Kevin Keats.
Yeah. When you have a non-conference strength of schedule that bad, you have to be flawless. It's the most consistent metric the committee uses.
Ask Wake Forest last year.
Mm-hmm. You just have to be flawless. And Clemson had 2 quad 3 losses, 2 quad 4 losses. They had 4 quad 1 wins. Half of those was NC State. They had 6 wins against teams in the field. Half of those were NC State. So really a lot of the strength of their resume was just them owning NC State. They did have a nice win at Pitt. They did beat Duke at home. Those were early in the season. And then Clemson, you know, this year, you didn't want to be playing the bottom 4 teams in the ACC a lot. They got them 7 times. It just happened to be bad luck for them. They get Florida State twice. They got Georgia Tech twice. They got Louisville twice. Yeah, that really dragged down the schedule and puts you in a no-win, lot-to-lose situation. And when you're playing, and you add a game against BC and a game against Notre Dame, that's 8 games where they had nothing to gain and a lot to lose. They're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to go 8-0 in that game. They end up going 6-2. And they really, because they had to be flawless, because of bad luck with how the non-conference strength of schedule went out, they owned NC State. I get that. But it's a metric-driven decision. And if you look at NC State's team sheet, they had 8 quad 1, 2 wins. Clemson had 7. They both beat the same number of teams in the field. NC State had a slightly better away from home record. And I think NC State had a little bit better depth of wins in terms of, you know, they did beat teams like Dayton and Vanderbilt and North Carolina that may not have made the tournament, but they were right there in the picture for the tournament. So I really wasn't as close. It's just the fact that Clemson kicked NC State's butt 2 times in 2 weeks that may have created a perception. But if you were to compare them side by side, it's not that close, to be blunt. about it.
Yeah, I mean,
Ethan,
this time a couple weeks ago, a lot of the chatter was NC State. You could still say they don't have a bad loss on their schedule, right? And Clemson has 2 very significant ones. So
4 if you want to go deeper.
4, yeah.
So, and when your non-conference strength of schedule 300 below, you have to be flawless. Rutgers, by the way, same problem.
Yeah.
They were even better version of Clemson, but their non-conference strength of schedule was 314, and they lost 4 quad 3 games.
I was surprised that UNC ended up above them on the first 4 out, though. Did that surprise either of y'all?
I was a little, when I started looking at that team sheet, I was like, oh boy, NC State fans are going to go crazy. But honestly, if Carolina had scored like 1 more point in about 3 or 4 games, they're probably in the field. Yeah, if they just to add to their misery.
If they had beaten Duke in the regular season finale, they're probably in the field. If they
score 1 more point in regulation or the first 3 overtimes against Alabama on a neutral court,
yeah,
they're in the NCAA tournament. You don't lose to Pittsburgh by 1 point at home, you're probably in the NCAA tournament, or 2 points on the road. Or, how about this? Don't blow a 6-point lead with 9 minutes to go against NC State in PNC Arena. If the outcome was different in that game, those 2 teams might have flip-flopped where they were in the NCAA tournament. So,
yeah, didn't feel like it at the moment, but that game, I mean, probably the winner decided the outcome of the NCAA tournament fate of both teams.
Yeah, and hindsight, Justin, you were right when you said they were locked in at that point.
It's true.